As we move on to learning target 6.2, we're going to start looking at the greatest common factor. Now, this question specifically says completely factor each expression, but essentially by completely factoring each expression, we can figure out the GCF. So we'll actually do both questions at the same time. So while we're doing these questions, we're looking for things that are in common. So we're looking to break these questions down into smaller pieces. Now, I'm going to start with a 5. And 5, we can't split it up, it's a prime number. You can write it as 5 and 1, and that's not going to help us for this. Now, if it was a number like 6, then I'd write it as 2 and 3, and I'll start looking at those composite numbers. X squared just means x times x. So what I'm doing here is I'm listing the prime factors of each of the two terms. When I get to 15, I know I can split that up, because I know that that's 5 times 3, and there's just one x this time. Once I've done that for all the terms, and sometimes there's 3 terms, so you'd have 3 lists, you look for things that are common to both. So I can see that there's a 5 on the first list and also on the second list. I can also see there's an x on the first list and an x on the second list. Now, if the question only said what is the GCF, you'd look for what you circled on one of the 2 rows. So I circled a 5 and an x, therefore the GCF would be just 5x. As this question says factor though, we start by writing the GCF, and then we write down the things that we didn't circle. So on the top, I didn't circle an x. On the bottom, I didn't circle a 3. Notice this question says plus, so we fill in a plus as well. Now, the way we can check our answer for this is we can multiply back like you did in Unit 5. 5x times x, 5x squared. 5x times 3, 5 times 3 is 15, and then with an x. So numbers first, letters second, if you want to check your answer for that question. Let's do the same thing then with question 5. And see if I can split this one up. Now, 9 I know I can actually split up as 3 and 3. You might notice that 36 is also a 9 times table, so you might choose not to split this up. You might just leave 9 as exactly like it is right now. So I'm going to split it up though as 3 times 3. I'm going to put the negative sign here as well. And n to the 5 just means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 n's multiplied together. Now for 36, I recognize that as 4 times 9, but I also recognize 9 can be split up as 3 times 3, and technically I recognize 4 can also be split up as 2 times 2 if necessary. Now, actually I didn't need to split this one up this time because there are no 2's on the top. But sometimes if you don't split those up, you sometimes miss a factor, so sometimes better just to split everything up. N cubed, 1, 2, 3 n's. And then we look for things that are common. So I can see there's a negative for each one. I can see that there's a 3. In fact, I can see that there's 2 3's for this one. And I can see there's an n, I can see there's a second n, and I can actually see that there's a third n for this question. So as I'm doing the GCF for this one, the things that I circled, well, I circled 2 3's, 3 times 3 is 9, and I circled 3 n's, so n cubed. So if it says the GCF, you could put negative 9n cubed, or you could actually just go with 9n cubed as well. And what did I not circle? Well, I did not circle 2 n's, so that would be n squared. And on this one, I didn't circle 2 2's, and 2 times 2 is 4. Now, I've got to be a little careful on this question. As I actually brought the negative out as a factor here, if I was to put a negative in here as this question, the 2 negatives together would multiply to make a positive. So as I already brought the negative to the front of this question, I'm just going to go ahead and put positive 4 here. And if you multiply back to check, negative 9 times 4 does give you that negative 36. So you can see that that question is correct. Now for question 6, there's actually 3 terms, so we're going to need to create 3 lists for this question. 6 I recognize is 2 times 3. X cubed is x times x times x. We'll raise this up a little bit. And y squared is y times y. 3 does not split, so I'm just going to leave it like that. X cubed is 3 x's, and it also says there's a y, just a single y. 12 I know I can write as 4 times 3, but 4 also splits up into 2 times 2. X squared means 2 x's, and then a y. Then I'm looking for things that appear on all 3 lists this time. So I can't pick a 2 because the middle row doesn't have a 2. I can pick a 3 though, because each row has a 3. I can also see each row has an x, and actually each row has a second x as well. I can't go for a third x because there are no more x's left on the bottom to circle. I do notice that there's a y for each one though, and I think that's everything I can see there. So what did I circle? 3, 2 x's and a y. So 3x squared y. So if the question says what's the GCF, that's the GCF. As the question said factor, let's look what we did not circle. 2xy. Question says minus here. I did not circle an x, so put x. And I didn't circle two 2's, which is 4, and this one says plus. And that's how you go ahead and factor. If you have everything circled, just remember you don't put 0, you actually put 1. And the reason you put 1 is, supposing there was an extra x on each of these questions, and this was to actually be circled, 3 you could actually split up as 3 times 1. We just tend not to write that down, but just remember 1 would always be the answer, not 0, if you did have everything circled. But this time we didn't do that because we did actually have one term that was still uncircled.